Order.
Okay. All set, Jim. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll go ahead and start 6 o'clock. The first item on the agenda is consider approving the minutes.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Move second, all in favor? Next item is to, if you don't mind skipping, Gary's right here. Would you like to skip over that?
No.
We'll jump right to number 3 here. Gary Smith from the superintendent from RSU 18. Gary, good evening and welcome.
Oh, good. Nice to be here. You know, it's kind of, you know, in the big scheme of things, it feels like we just finished budgets, but it's now a year-round job. I don't know what, but you know, every budget year I try to learn a little bit more. And about 2 weeks ago, I was at a meeting and I heard something that helped me explain, or well, maybe you can give me some feedback, but I think it explains Maine school funding formula better than I've ever heard it before. And because I would always, I mean, you'd start explaining it and people's eyes would glaze over after about 3 or 4 sentences and you knew it was way too complicated. And it is very complicated. But if you use the notion of valuation per student, property valuation per student, you can really understand what's happened to our district. So first of all, we all know that we've gone through a very difficult financial downturn. Well, concurrently at the same time, what's happened is property values in the communities of RSU 18 have gone up versus the rest of the state. And in fact, this basically is a metric. All it is dividing the number of students by the total property value in the district. So in 2008-9, that number was $532,720. In the current year, that is just a tad under $700,000. That is an increase of 31%. That's and the way our funding formula in the state works, it basically says if you, as this number increases, you are well enough off in terms of property value to pay more for education locally. So in a difficult economy, which would have been challenging enough, you have gone from a 56% receiver for education to a 44% receiver. So every dollar you get for education, you used to get 56 cents, now we get 44. And you know, I guess one way of looking at that is that over the same time frame, if everything else was equal, local property taxes for education, the way the Maine funding formula works, should have gone up. Maybe not the same amount, but it should have trended up as state aid was going down. We've lost about $5 million from the state. And however, I think, well, I know, and I'm here to inform you tonight, that the assessment over that same time period is actually decreased to the local communities by about $242,000 when you're adding in both the local budget and adult ed budgets. So how did we do that? We, first of all, through efficiencies and consolidation did result in cost savings. We leveraged stimulus monies. We leveraged federal jobs money. We cut a lot out of the budget. And we just pretty much made the budget leaner. And another thing, and it was an issue last year, is we had built up a fund balance specifically to help us navigate this downturn. I would have preferred not to use so much last year. We did. So one of the things that's helped us to make this happen is we were able to use all those things and not have an increase. All the magic, you know, all the rabbits are now out of the hat. We have one more reserve. It's our Medicaid dollars. We no longer get Medicaid dollars. 5 or 6 years ago, we used to get $600,000 or $700,000 a year. That's gone. We have about $800,000, and it's gone. So So anyways, I guess what I'm saying is, the funding formula, the way it works, now that RSU 18 versus the rest of the state and communities is saying you need to pay for every dollar of education subsidy you get, you should be paying 56 cents, and the state's going to be paying 44 cents. 5 years ago, it was just the opposite. And so this year and next year are going to be the two, I guess, days of reckoning. And I specifically on this packet that you have this line, and I use this line, this blue line, to signify the core level of education that's been provided in RSU 18 schools thus far. And you know, we can manage with what the communities will fund us at, but we will starting this year, and depending on what the direction is for next year from the board of directors, we will intentionally cross that line. So, or the communities will pay more for education in RSU, or a local share of education in RSU 18. So that's, I mean, so that's our funding formula. And just so you know, there is a group doing an analysis of that right now. It's a I think their name is the PICUS group. They just issued a status report. I can send a copy of it. It's a public document, but I don't know if you're interested, but I can share that. And let's see. But one of the things that I think, at least some talk about is out there, is that you might want to add, in addition to students' valuation, median income might start, or at least there's a suggestion that might need to factor into the income equation, or the subsidy equation. But that's a long time out. So just so you know. In addition, so this is a district-wide thing. Another thing the funding formula does is, the law pretty much dictates, you know, if Oakland's valuation goes up more than the other districts, which has been the way it has been for the last 2 years, your share of the cost of education is going to be more. And I can show you exactly what's happened. So Belgrade, in the last 4 years, they've had a $149,000 increase in assessment, even though overall education assessments dropped. China, they've had a decrease of $156,500. Oakland, you've had an increase of $246,650. Rome, they won the lottery. They had a decrease of $586,000. And so, and then Sydney has had an increase of about $56,600. And that's just the way the valuations change with respect to each other over this time frame. So, you know, I know we got maybe criticized for how we managed this, but I think we've done a pretty good job of losing $5 million and keeping local assessment flat, at least thus far. So,
does that take into consideration the formula for student population as well as valuation, whereby Oakland is getting an increasing share because of the formula where we revised the 100% valuation to valuation and student population? So is this based on both of those factors, what you got here on the graphs?
These numbers come from the state planning office valuation numbers and the actual enrollment numbers. So every single town except Rome is based upon how the funding formula works and the number of students they have, are next year projected to pay 8.11 mils for education. So I think the answer is yes to that, if I understood that.
Well, so, I know 2 years ago there's a committee that came up with a
the cost sharing? The cost share. Yes.
Which took into consideration both things, and each year Oakland gets a little higher share because it's a 3-year process to get to the full
okay.
point.
I misunderstood you. The additional local fund cost sharing formula, we're in year 2 of that. And so that's 2/3 to the new funding formula and 1/3 to the straight percentage that was in place. So that is in place, and that's helping to create some savings, or I can't remember who.
We are the opposite.
Okay.
But I guess, does that include, that figure
That's-
you just said, does that include the transition to the,
12-13 would have been the first year that was starting in there. However, there were no additional, because we had to cut the budget so much, there were no additional local funds. I think this year, I've got it, but there's about $600,000 of additional local funds. So technically, this is the first year that's happening. So,
Gary, before you get too far from that $44 there, do you have a feeling for how much that changes in a really rich town, say to a really poor town, like say Falmouth? Do you have any idea what they might?
I mean, it's really funny how this funding formula works, and you might make the assumption that Falmouth is a low receiver, but this is where I think median income might be a good thing to factor into the funding formula, because we all know that Brunswick South, the median incomes might be a little higher,
Yeah.
and might be a little more able to pay, but you know that's going to be a political hot potato. But in general, a Falmouth, a Cape Elizabeth, even Topsom, or you know, the coastal communities are going to be low receivers because they have a lot of property value. Yeah. So, and we're still in, you know, if the very low receivers, I mean, like. I can even look at, and there's a chart in the thing, but Belgrade ultimately, with the new funding reports, and it's in your packet, is really a very low receiver. Their valuation versus their students, and I'm going to just do it, generates about $30,000. Your valuation with your students generates about $5.6 million. And it's just the way the funding formula works. You know, so, and that's just within our district. Brunswick, Belgrade would be the Falmouth in terms of property valuation. They're ultimately a very low receiver, and they pay out of their property tax base the most, I mean, almost all of their educational dollars locally.
So even within this district, you're receiving less money for
Yep.
the Belgrade students than you are the Oakland students per student?
No, we get, so how much we get is determined by what we've spent and how much staff we have, but it comes up to a number, and it's $6,400 roughly for elementary students, $6,800 for high school students. And then based upon that and a bunch of calculations, that's what determines how much a town pays. So for example, and let me just this data is coming out of a new system, but if you it's in the back of your packet, I believe, and it's the one that says page 5. It's this document. If you look at that bottom oh no, it's actually the previous page, page 4. If you look at that bottom, in the bottom right, state contribution by municipality. So just so you know, for Belgrade, we're getting $30,000. China is generating $3.4 million. Oakland, 5.6. Rome, 0. Sydney, 3.9. And that's a very that's very simply the end result of a lot of calculations, but looking at the number of students your town has, and then looking at the required mill rate to support education in those towns. So my message, I know a lot of people don't really want to hear it, is I say the problem we've faced and I think we've done a pretty good job about it, has been managing quite a large revenue loss and still kind of keeping the education system pretty much intact. And the reason I say that is if you look, this is our budget history, and I basically tell people, anybody that'll listen, I said I probably picked a pretty darn bad time to enter the superintendency because that was when the economy went south. Our budget is, you know, if I don't count the retirement, the teacher retirement cost shift, our budget is less today than it was when I became the superintendent. And if you look at the budget change in percentage dollars over the last few years, 2008-9, 0.2% increase. This was a good year. 2009-10, it went up 1.2%. The next one is the first budget I put together. That was a decrease of 1.3%. Second year was minus 4.2%. Last year was the infamous flat year, so it was 0. And then, if I don't count the teacher retirement money, this budget is basically down 0.5%, not quite 0.5%. If I add the retirement money in, which is $425,000, it's up less than 1%.
Do you know how that's going to go yet?
No.
Oh, okay.
We're not going to know till probably mid to the end of June. But it is, to be honest, I don't understand the strategy that school districts in the state are using, but a lot are not putting in their budget. I think that's dancing with that's not a safe way to do this. I think if because there's several scenarios, and it all depends upon how the state deals with this. If the retirement, I'll take you through it. If the retirement money stays at the state level, that's a $28 million cost. So somehow they'd have to figure out how to deal with that in the budget. But in addition, the governor put $14 million into general purpose aid to support that $28 million cost. So if the retirement money goes out and that $14 million goes out, everything else being equal, we're probably going to get about $300,000 less subsidy. So by having that 400 in there, that would deal with that loss. So that's option. So A is we've got money for retirement costs if it happens. Option B is we can deal with a further reduction in educational subsidy if that 14 million is taken out. And the third scenario is if the retirement money got pulled out and the 14 million stayed in, my recommendation is you'd use that to have a reserve for next year, because next year is going to be a very, you know, everybody's saying this year is the tough one. Next year is going to be the tougher one for us in terms of, and it's not going to be, again, it's not going to be on the spending side of things. We've figured out how to, keep costs down, but revenue-wise, how you fund that budget is going to, we're just going to need more local dollars. I don't want to take down your meeting, but I'll just show a few things, because I think one of the things that really shows we've been working pretty hard is if you look at, and I believe you have this in your packet, but the district and state per pupil costs, we have since 2007-8 been under $1,000 under the state average. And if you look at how that's tracking over the last few years, it's gone from 1,042, then it went to 931, to 1161, to 1239, and right now we are $1,343 below the state average, and that's 11/12 data. I'll guarantee you that number is probably pushing $1,400 now. I just because I watch those numbers very closely. So, and just another thing, and more just informational, these benchmarks, this benchmark data that I put together looks at our area school districts, so Waterville, Fairfield, who else? I think that's pretty much, I compared against them because they are area schools. But we are the biggest school district in the area, so I also picked districts that were about 3,200 students. So I included South Portland, RSU 60 and RSU 23, which are schools in the southern part of the state. And this is just the evil administration cost. But I think it shows that our district versus schools of the same size or schools in the local area or versus the state average, that we aren't out of line. I have to give my wife credit for these because she said you need to put these on big charts. So give me feedback if that works, but I won't give her the credit.
Gary, I think John had a question.
Well, I got a question on what makes up the property tax increase? Is we're having a lot of construction of new homes, or is it actual property values per se, or a combination thereof?
Do you know, Peter? I mean, the state planning office does it, and my understanding it's based upon retail sales in a X period of time, and they do it once a year for every community in the state of Maine. But do you?
Well, your question is, how do they calculate state valuation?
What's causing our state our valuation to be so high? Is it because we're having a lot of new construction, or is it actual property values going up?
One of the interesting things that we know is that this year Oakland's state valuation is less than it was the prior year. However, if you compare to the other towns in the district, theirs went down more. So that means we've lost less ground than the others, which translates to the same thing as a gain when you're dividing up the local share amongst those towns. So that's unfavorable, but that's part of it. But Gary is right, when the state comes in, they take a look at all of the property sales. So they've got actual sales figures, and they compare those to what we assess people, and a comparison is made. Same comparison is made for every town. So everybody has an incentive to keep their assessments close to market value. And the numbers are what the numbers are. What the realtors tell us is that people have not been selling their homes, their properties, at a discount, but they've been on the market longer. But then more recently things have started to turn around, and I was told recently by a realtor that now they need more listings. People are entering the market to buy, but there's not a lot of property out there right now because people are hoping for the economy to improve. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's somewhat.
Well, it seems like, that all over the country, housing has dropped off, and it had such a crash because of the housing issue, caused this whole mess. Somewhat part of what caused the whole mess in the first place, but Oakland seems to wasn't affected by that, and I never could understand quite why. And every time I heard it, they say, well, we haven't had enough properties sold so we can assess it. Yet it sounds like, yes, we have.
We've been letting
permits.
We've been letting a considerable amount of permits for new construction. As you ride around
so that might be a piece of it.
You see some new construction, and it's evident.
So that's what would, so that would be a number that would push that valuation up.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Those lakes are holding the valuation. They're staying up high.
Yeah.
So ultimately, after months of work, people really only care about one number. So what I'll share the number we have given the information we have, and this is built upon a lot of things, whether the retirement money stays in, whether they look at other taxation. I've heard rumors about 1% for sales tax, temporary, or I just don't know all those things. But a lot of newspapers, I think, are going to sell in the next 60 days in terms of keeping people informed of what's going on in the district. But, if at the district budget meeting, the budget of $32,281,753 is approved, and that also includes, and in addition to that, there's a budget of $72,000 for adult education. That would require, in total, an additional assessment to the RSU 18 communities of $1,280,691. So that's one of the numbers that everybody cares to hear about.
Would you give me those two numbers again, please? 32 what?
Okay, so the K-12 budget is $32,281,753. And it's in one of your slides.
Oh, we got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that
Oh, all right,
right there.
all right. It wasn't on the front page here, there was just a question mark, so I didn't know it was in there later.
Right, and then the adult ed budget is $72,032. To make that funding work,
Okay, I'll get it.
to balance that out with the revenues, and that, we now don't have that 1.5 or 4.5 million in balance forward, requires an additional assessment to the RSU 18 communities of $1,280,691. And that increase, based upon the information we have right now to Oakland, is $352,370. I know that Dana had asked us a couple of questions about charter schools. You want me to?
Yeah, well, every day there's something in the
Yep.
paper about charter schools, and the facts are completely opposite from one article to the next, so I was
Right.
wondering just
Well,
what
there's
your
a
take on
lot
the whole
of-
thing.
That's one of just watch what's going on, and there's a proposal out there to take the cost of charter schools totally off the backs of the local school district and make it a state cost. I'd support that, because the way we have it now, it puts charter schools and public schools against each other, and that's not good for an education system. So, I would, as long as the state continues to move towards 55% funding, I think that's a nice way to move. So, but the question you had was, right now, with the current law, is it state or local money that goes to the student that goes to a charter school? It's both. So when I go back to the 56 cents that we pay and the 44 cents that the state pays, all follows that student.
Is that right? So it isn't just the money you get from the state that goes to the charter school, you have to take the local tax money you get from the town and send it with them too?
Yep.
Now see, I've never seen that in the paper.
Well, that's in the fine print.
That's in the fine print. Oh.
But the answer is, and ballparkish, and it varies by school, and if it's a special education student, can get quite costly. If you're talking about a regular ed student, ballpark $9,000 a student. And we just got a notice from the Maine Academy of Natural Sciences, which is the Goodwill Hinckley School,
Yeah.
7 students. And this is one of the frustrating things is you have they aren't required to tell you that it's happening. It's just, here you go. And so, but for example, and we're doing this right now, last year we got a note from them saying, oh, you've got 3 students there. Well, we said, okay, give us name, rank, and serial number where they live. 2 of those students weren't even in the district. So 7 is what they've told us. We're asking for address data and all that kind of stuff. So we watch that very closely. I think that's, at least right now with the charter schools in place, that's probably the one that we would see students attend. And that is an alternative type of high school that probably is the right educational setting for some students. So it's more for kids that have kind of just aren't successful in a traditional high school.
Going back on the numbers you just gave us, the $32,281,000.
Yep.
That's the budget. Does that include the money for retirement?
Mm-hmm.
But it also includes the $14 million.
If you look at the revenue sheet, in your packet, let me just show you. Yeah, so it's two things. On the spending side, that 32 million spending plan includes 400